Welcome to Antarctica Did That For Me. We're a podcast for everyday people with a little adventure in their hearts. We're Keri and Cassa, and we've spent huge chunks of our time living and working in Antarctica. Welcome to a journey that changed our lives. We hope it will change yours too.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Antarctica Did That For Me. I'm Cassa Grant, and my co-host Keri Nelson is right here with me.
Hi, everyone.
And today we are going to talk about things that we know how to do because we went to Antarctica. This could be things
I didn't expect to do.
Things that I didn't expect to do.
Surprise!
And tell us a little bit more about that, Keri, because you were telling me before the show, and I loved what you were saying about this unexpected part of these things.
Well, you know, when you think to yourself, hey, I'm going to go work in Antarctica, and you'd never thought about working in Antarctica before, you kind of imagine what your life's going to be like. So I was hired as a janitor initially in my first year. And so what did I picture? I'm like, I'm going to go down there. I'm going to clean some toilets. I'm going to, sweep a few floors. People will be nice to me or not. And that's what my life's going to be. I'm just going to run around cleaning things. And that was the vision that I had for what my reality was going to be. And I will keep talking about other things that I ended up learning in those times that I was down there. But that's what I thought my life was going to be about. How about you?
Oh, I love this because we know that we really have no way of imagining, but we still can't help it, can we? I did not have a lot of expectations. I just knew, I thought, yeah, it'll be really cold. I did way over prepare because I was just like, I'm not going to be able to get my special kind of vitamins or these kinds of things. But in terms of what I thought I would learn, yeah, I never could have guessed the things that I learned down there would be the things that I would learn, even though a lot of mine do come into driving, but, and I was already a
Right.
commercial driver at that point, but things that I learned how to drive that I really didn't even know existed before I went down. But I think that the point here that I really like about this is that a lot of times we kind of, again, try to imagine these things and we just really can't. And so it's fun to see how these things play out. So that's basically what this episode's about is, what we thought we'd see or what we thought we'd learn and then actually what we ended up learning. One of the things that, again, I mentioned, I was a commercial bus driver since I was 25 and I used to drive a lot of big vehicles. And I knew that I would be driving big vehicles. Like Ivan the Terra bus is a huge, huge behemoth of a machine. But I did not.
Can you describe it for the people who don't know what that is?
Basically, these are these kind of, there's only like 10 of them in the world, I think. And they're designed for the Alaskan and Canadian tundra tourist activities, right? So we got one down in Antarctica and you get 56 passengers on there. It's got wheels that are these big snow tires that are I think they're about the same height. I'm 5'6". They're about my height. So they're these big snow tires and they're very bouncy. So when you're driving in by Ivan, you're just kind of bouncing right along.
It's the size of a semi, basically, if people are trying to picture this thing.
Yeah, I would say, it's probably about the size of a semi truck, in terms of with a trailer. Maybe not quite as long, but it's up there. Yeah. And so it's just a whole different beast. Like I said, I've been driving 40-foot coaches throughout Mexico and US and Canada a little bit. This bus is much bigger and wider and just doesn't, as you can imagine, it doesn't corner very well. You have to really plan things out when you're driving that vehicle. However, it doesn't really go over like 25 miles an hour. So, you're not really worrying about anything like that. But that was definitely something that was a new challenge for me, which was really fun.
I still can't drive that bus. So that is not a skill that I walked away with. But I don't think you would have ever imagined that you'd walk away with being able to be probably pretty expert at driving a very unique vehicle in the world. It's not that my vision of what my life would be like as a janitor was wrong. Like I definitely also cleaned floors and I still cleaned toilets and I still did all of the things that I expected. There wasn't anything about that vision that was wrong. But I found that I picked up these additional skills and additional things that I did because I was there. And one of those things is I am a much, much better musician. I took some piano lessons when I was a kid, but after my years in Antarctica, I would say whatever taste is, but just proficient. I can play in a band now. I can be very happy to stand up solo and sing and play in front of people in a way that can lead a room and just have the confidence to perform. And that's just part of the after school life of Antarctica. But because the music community is so warm and welcoming, you find when you go down to Antarctica and start living life down there, I just picked up some skills. I found some musician friends. People are very generous with their time, really happy to teach you a few chords on the guitar. And you end up with plenty of free time. And I expanded that into becoming a much better musician. And boy, that was definitely not on my radar. When I thought, what am I going to go to Antarctica to do? Become a musician? That was not it. But that is one of the things that happened. It's a skill that I have now that I'm done with Antarctica.
Nice.
How about you? What's another one for you?
Well, okay, this is again something that I really had not anticipated at all, which was radio communication. So we have little walkie-talkies that we carry around down there, and radio etiquette. I have 2 different channels that I had to monitor in one of my jobs. Sometimes you'd be saying something and you didn't realize that your walkie-talkie was on, and oh boy, that was always really, really embarrassing. I used to, one time I hot mic'd. I was coming back to town and I was singing and hot micing the whole way back to town almost. It was
Cassa,
so embarrassing.
yes.
I mean,
the
reason it was embarrassing, I think like Dolly Parton probably, but the reason it was embarrassing is because no one else can use the channel while you're doing that. So people only had things they needed to talk about. And all they could hear was Cassa Grant bellowing on about how she would always love you or whatever. So, but yeah, so getting better
Did you get
at just having that.
Did people know who you were?
Yeah, definitely. It was a pretty special. But I mean, it wasn't like a super high busy time of day, so it was okay. But it was super.
So everybody had time to listen.
Yeah, but it definitely made me more aware.
They weren't busy, so they could tune in.
Yeah, exactly. I got razzed over that one for a while, but it was okay. So that's one of the things that I definitely learned.
So your music skills also expanded then, it sounds like.
Oh, yes, exactly.
All right. When we're talking about like different things that I know how to do, one thing that really surprised me, this is from the other part of the continent over at Palmer Station, which for people who don't know, that is the marine science base of the U.S. Antarctic program. But I ended up with pretty significant boating skills. When you're over at a small station like that, there's a lot of jobs that you have to kind of take up. People learn how to be a firefighter or a glacier rescuer, or, there are many jobs you have to take because there aren't that many people there. So support with the marine science is another thing you're called on to do sometimes. So I ended up really getting quite good at driving Zodiacs around, which is, was a real surprise to me. When I thought I'm going to Antarctica, learning to be a boat driver was like, no, that wasn't at all something that I thought would happen, but it was. It had me tune into the world of water and the world of movement on the water and just the things you do to watch the weather, coming in when you operate on the water safety, just how islands work and how shoals work and all of those things. Big, big, big surprise for me. Didn't expect that at all to be part of my Antarctic experience.
That is so cool. I would have loved to have done that. Actually, that sounds really, really fun. Because I live on the beach here in New Zealand, and I really didn't. I mean, as a very much a landlubber growing up in Montana, I just absolutely love being right next to the water. It's so dynamic, and I don't know, you're just paying attention to the tides more, and I love that feeling. So that's a good one.
I mean, I know how to avoid penguins and whales on the water now.
Wow.
What?
That's an interesting skill to have for sure.
I know. I mean, I know how they move. What? How do I know that? Like that's a real surprise to me. But I do. It's really cool.
Well, one of mine I really loved that I guess I probably should have anticipated this, but I didn't, was, again, driving. But snow road. So the snow road, we talked about this a little bit in some previous episodes, but we drive on packed snow, the ice shelf out to the airfield. And the airfield itself is actually packed snow, like very hard packed, so that you can actually drive wheeled vehicles or wheeled aircraft on it. It basically becomes really hard and can support that weight. So when it gets warmer in the summer, the road gets a lot softer. If you go off the road, then that's it. You're stuck. You just kind of, it's like this thwomp, like you're just kind of like, whoops, okay.
Dread in your stomach. Oh no.
Oh, gotta call fleet ops, which is the people that will pull you out. But what I learned, especially my second season, which is when we had a lot of dust blow in from a nearby island called Black Island. Well, it basically completely messed up one of our airfields for years. We had to move the airfield because of this, but the whole road was just all these little black specks of dust would draw heat from the sun and create pock marks and holes. And so the road itself just started to melt much faster than usual. And then we had all these big divots and things like this. And that was a really hard season. What I really started to learn is just how to get unstuck better. So we have some really amazing vehicles. And well, you crab, what's called crabbing. So you basically, essentially, we have these big Ford E350 vans that they've got guts, and I'd just be like, oh man, I'm stuck. And they're like, maybe I could just try a little bit, just give it a little bit. And gently kind of wiggle your way out of that hole. And there were so many times when I thought, yeah, I'm totally stuck. I'm not going to make it out of this. And maybe get out and dig a little bit and kind of free up underneath the van a little bit. And then just kind of wiggle your way right out of it was amazing. And some of the other vehicles we have that are articulated vehicles where they bend in the middle, then you can really do that because you're basically changing the angle that your wheels are turning at, and it creates a lot more leverage. So it really made me think more creatively about getting unstuck in general, I will say, like of just like, man, I'm stuck. And then like, well, I'll just give it a little bit and see what I can do. It was fun. It built a lot more confidence. And I mean, obviously without trying to damage the vehicles, but when you know that the vehicle can do it and you can do it, you're just a little more willing to try.
That's a good point. I generally think for all Antarcticans, our problem solving and think outside of the box skills grow exponentially in that environment, because there are so many things that happen there that you wouldn't think to even predict that would happen. You have to do some of that problem solving skills. So I like that that's something that you think about that, because I think it's really true. You did figure some of those things out. I remember helping somebody get unstuck who wasn't a northern person. He was a person from a southern state, and we drove into soft snow. And I just did the little trick. I'm like, well, you take out the floor mats and then you wedge them underneath there, and that got traction, and that just blew that guy's mind. That's what a Minnesota girl knows. So you have to think about those unstuck things.
When you grow up in it, you do have those skills already to a degree, I will say, for sure. And but the skill set around the crabbing, around turning the wheels, like you basically would turn them one way and kind of give it a little bit, and then turn all the way to the left and then all the way to the right. And it's kind of like this little dance. That was definitely a skill that I learned down there, just how to do that better. Okay. So, yeah.
I like that one. That's a good one. That's not a skill I really did learn. That's not one I walked away with. But here's one I walked away with. And I don't know if I care if I continue to retain this information, but I ended up working a couple of seasons basically doing mail service stuff in Antarctica. Right. So I was in charge of the post office at the South Pole a couple of years. And then I was in charge of the post office for the winter, for a couple of winter seasons at McMurdo Station too. And what I learned then is how fiddly and precise and follow the letter every step of the law the U.S. mail system is, and the way that you have to get people to address their letters, and the way that things have to be just so and stacked in just certain ways when you send it out, and the mail bags have to be sent in the certain ways, and there's just all these tiny little minutia forms, and you don't think they're a big deal, but there's a postal inspector who comes down and looks at it, and you can get really dinged if you don't have it right. This seems to me like information I'm never going to use in my life at all, but I do know a lot of things about the mail system and how things are going to be packaged up, and how, just the rules. And, postcards would come back if people didn't have things addressed like exactly the right way, or I don't know, it seems so silly, but I realized, oh gosh, someone's taking this seriously enough that the mail's not moving unless I do this right. So there's an encyclopedia of knowledge I'll probably never need again in my life.
It's interesting to think about it from a systems perspective. And actually, that's my next one. I mean, I always loved systems thinking, but down there in particular, you have a closed ecosystem in terms of how we're interacting with the continent as humans, and the things that we're doing down there, and at McMurdo in particular. And so I really started to think about project management differently, and just kind of how all the systems work together differently. And so, I mean, I think that that's something you could definitely take away from your postal understanding, is like why certain things have to be a certain way. I think that's an interesting part of that. And so for me, with project management in particular, I learned so much about project management because, particularly in my second job where I was managing materials, we took on a couple of really big projects, and they were projects that we had to basically sell to kind of higher ups. Man, I still use that. I still use the way that I thought about projects down there, and the way that I started to think about, I mean, this is really dorky, but Gantt charts and project management software and tools like that help you put all the blocks where you want them to be, right? Like I think of it like, again, with advanced Lego, but it's like, how do I think about this piece and how it's going to help that piece, and all of these things together? I love that kind of thinking. So I didn't expect to get more of that down there at all.
Okay, speaking of systems, but a slightly different system, I learned casually, and then sometimes out of necessity, a lot more about weather and reading actual meteorological charts, and looking at models, and understanding even what the little wind symbols meant, and what that meant things were coming in, how to read temperature, how to read precipitation predictions, especially, I mean, in all of Antarctica, you really need to know what's coming in the weather because it could kill you, you know, like real fast if you don't understand what's going on. And at the tiny station, Palmer Station, where we're going out on the water quite a bit, it was even more important that we understood how to read a weather chart, all those weather charts. Think about planning our work days, even 3 or 4 days in advance based on what we saw the modeling of weather was doing. And I've never really been called on to know weather and that granular level, even within hours, you know, because we would be in charge of watching safety as the boats were out. And if you were on radio watch, you had to kind of see those charts and see, oh, what's coming at us? Do I need to call these boats back in so everybody's safe? So just a general meteorology knowledge, I've walked away with that. And it wasn't anything that I predicted that I would need, not on that granular level. Before I went to Antarctica, but I have it now. I know how to read a weather chart, lots of weather charts now. I never did before.
That is fascinating too. And yeah, I learned more about it too, not to the degree that you did, but I mean, as you say.
Oh, and another one, Cassa, on that. I learned with my long hair that I have been wearing a wind gauge and my whole life. And it wasn't until Palmer Station that I learned to hold up my hair in the air and I could figure out exactly what downwind was. Just even the thinking that I could use something that was on me to have knowledge about my environment. I've had this long hair almost my whole life, but I never started using it as sort of a wind directional gauge until Antarctica. And that's just, again, learning to, you know, think outside of the box and be a little bit of a problem solver.
I love that. That's fantastic. I probably did that inadvertently, but I didn't realize.
See, everybody, if you have long hair, you should know this. If you have a question of what's downwind, just use your hair. It'll blow. You'll see which way the wind is coming through.
Very quickly and easily. My interactions with the weather were with working at the airfield. So I learned so much more about airplanes than I ever knew before. This is kind of like your boat driving one. You know, how to approach airplanes when you're driving a vehicle next to them, or just basic airfield ops. We were always very in tune with the weather because the weather in town, which is about an hour away from where we were at the airfield, could be completely different. I feel so bad for these folks, but one of the flights that was leaving in April, I think they got delayed just recently by it was a month, I think. It was 25 to 30 days that it was between mechanical failures for the plane or whatever. And then the weather just changing so quickly, that these folks were stuck down in Antarctica for an extra month longer than they were supposed to be. And I think that might be the longest that there's been a delay like that. But everybody definitely cares a lot about the weather down there, as you say, because of life or death, but also because of the airplanes and the way that we are operating down there. You really have to be paying attention to this stuff, especially if you are part of the airfield. Sometimes we'll have planes that, they're scheduled to fly in at this point, but then they have to circle because the weather's not quite good enough. So then that changes every other part of the schedule. So it was just being able to be reflexive and flexible around scheduling was really a big part of that too. There's always a plan, and then there's 3 other backup plans, and then you might actually have to create a new one, and that's the one you actually go with. Based on the airfield ops. Yeah, it was great. I actually really enjoyed that.
Okay, this is a skill that I think there's only one generation of people who are listening to us who can really relate to this, and it's not a skill I'm ever going to need. It's a dead skill, but I think it's funny that I ran into this thing in Antarctica. And so I'm talking to you baby boomers, because I think this is irrelevant to Gen X and below. When I worked at McMurdo Station, up to maybe 2016 or 17, probably 2016, I was still working with laundry machines. These were these old industrial laundry machines. These are machines that are as big as a room, really, and you would do all of the linens of station in them. But these machines were so old that they used punch card. Let me repeat myself, punch card technology. And so you would take this long, I don't know, probably 8.5 by 5 plasticky piece that there were little holes punched out of it, and you would have to feed it into the top of this machine, and it would just chunk, 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 and read the little tabs coming through the machine, feed it through, and that would be the laundry cycle. And when the laundry machine broke, there was this one little package up in the supply area. This is old, I'll say this wrong, probably 1960s, maybe 1970s technology. But to fix the machine, the utility technician would go get one of those pieces of plastic and with a little X-Acto knife, cut out the right punches physically cut them out to make the machine work. And it would just go chunk, 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 chunk. And you had to load it at the right point in the punch card to make the machine work. How old of technology is that? But that is really the only experience I've ever had with computers that are that old. Like that's the original on-off switch kind of computer stuff. And to see that and kind of know that, oh, that was the thing that happened. It's not exactly a skill I have, although I probably could have punched out those X-Acto knifed out those cards too. That is a bonkers thing that I ran into in Antarctica.
That is so cool though, Keri. I love that. Like
Wild.
How interesting. And that kind of goes into some of, well, my next one, this is more driving, but this is driving forklifts and loaders. A lot of ours are from this, well, not quite from the 60s, but some of them are pretty old, and understanding like how to baby those machines through really harsh environment, etc. My favorite one was what we have called a pickle. And it's a very small loader that's articulated so it bends in the middle. And then the forks will actually tilt to the sides or down, you can just do the most amazing things with these machines. It's just awesome. Like I loved this kind of puzzle of like, oh, that creates like at a weird angle. Like how can I get this over here and try to figure out, and obviously with safety in mind, clearly, but like you could just get into places that you never thought you'd be able to get into. And these machines were so dynamic, and we would use them to unload shipping containers when we were bringing supplies down on our yearly resupply vessel. You had to drive them into or close up to just get the things out of the container, get the whatever crates or that kind of thing out. Learning how to do that and thinking about forking things. And I think I've mentioned this before, like you just start to think differently when you get back to the real world, because it's like, well, there's a machine for that. I can do that with this different type of machine. But those pickles are just so much fun, and so the reason they're called pickles is because they're painted green, and so a lot of them have names. And we're probably going to have an episode about, yeah, because they're basically like little green machines, and so a lot of them also they're the brand of pickle manufacturer that makes them is a tractor manufacturer called Case, and so a lot of them would have names like Just in Case or Basket Case, or I'm trying to think of different names that they had, and so they had different kind of clever names that played off of that, but they're just really phenomenal machines. I really enjoyed driving a pickle.
I've never driven one. I've heard they have terrible visibility, but it would be fun to learn how to drive one for sure. So I've got one more, and this is, and I'm not going to say I'm necessarily very super skilled at this, but I started to learn. I've took the baby steps of skills in a few things, because you and I were contractors, so we don't talk about the science world very much because we weren't involved in doing science day to day. We were more involved in operations and other jobs that go on station. But I have, and maybe you have had too, occasions to go out with grantees, and under everything I'm about to talk about has all permitted under the Antarctic Conservation Act. So anything I say I've done, there was a permit for it and a number, and you could look up my history in doing it because it's all above board. But I've helped measure penguins, so I know how to handle a penguin now, actually, or I've helped dig for bugs on an island. And so I've got the skills of looking for like these like little minute things and kind of differentiating between them. Or one thing that happened at Palmer is a couple of years ago, there's a new pier that got built at Palmer Station. And in the building of that pier, we were all as a station called upon to do marine mammal observation, basically, which is an actual precise skill set of animal identification. Whenever there's construction going around, you are just kind of held to making sure that animals their hearing isn't going to get damaged, or their bodies aren't going to get damaged by the motion and the commotion. And so we would have to spot. And I'm a lot better at differentiating whales and differentiating the kinds of seals and differentiating any birds that are in the area and making those kind of biological skills. And it was because I had to do that as part of my job. And boy, did I not expect to pick up those skills when I was in Antarctica on that really kind of minute level. So that's something I know now that I didn't know before either.
Wow, that is really cool. I
cool.
Didn't really get to do. No, I mean, some of the boondoggles that I had were more just out and about. They weren't necessarily involving the animals. So that's I'm jealous. That's a cool one.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Or digging for out looking at some moss beds and helping lay out some of the solar or some of the temperature gauges. I would never be able to run my own experiment, but I'm a great little helper. And so I learned up to those helping skills anyway.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah. And so, my last one is actually kind of a weird one. And so it's basically, I get better at understanding communications and persuasion down there. And this is might feel like kind of a stretch. Now I talk about personal branding in my business, but when I started to learn more about it and understand it more, I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is. This is basically like anybody who's Antarctica famous or, or who has this kind of cult of personality that people have gotten used to them, or they understand them and they really appreciate that about them. And, I won't name names, but there's certain people who really are just institutions down, I mean, Muro in particular, who just have very singular ways of being and acting and doing things. And so I started to think about that through kind of a communications and selling lens. And what I mean by that is like not necessarily selling a thing, but selling like an idea or a persona. And again, I don't think any of these people are doing this like it's this is my persona. It's just that I started to get really interested in that more, I think partly because there were just so many characters down there. And we've talked about that a little bit before, but and I'm sure we will talk about it later, but just kind of these larger than life personalities and the way that they communicated, the way that they would engage stakeholders. I mean, I'm using corporate speak right now, but the way that they would get people to buy in on ideas that they had. I learned a lot about that down there, which I didn't realize I was learning that at the time. Yeah. How to make things happen, how to use that force of your personality to persuade and influence folks, and not in like a creepy or manipulative way, but in a way that's like really like people like, yeah, I'm into it. Like what you were talking about with some of the music stuff. Like, you know, there were certain people who were really into bands and promoting people being more musical. And so their enthusiasm just kind of helps sell it to other people too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. That's actually a really good picture of what happens in Antarctica. Boy, we came away just so much smarter than when we went into a Cassa, and also maybe dumber, but these are the ways that we're smarter. Anyway, I guess it's the time when we kind of stop yapping at the people listening to us, but we do have just a little mission for anybody who's, still listening. We're talking about Antarctica things, but in anybody's life, I think you could take a look back in a year or 2 years or even a 5-year period of your life. And I just think it's a really healthy exercise to give yourself some credit for the things that you know now that were unexpected. Like if you would have been 5 years ago, you would never know then the things you know now. And I think for me, this was a really good exercise in the Antarctica enumeration. So I'd love to offer that out to people who are listening to maybe just give yourself some credit and take a look at, list some of the things that you've learned how to do in the last few years. It, gets you started on thinking about what might come next. Because for all of us, that's, what we're talking about here. For all of us, there's a next step after Antarctica for Cassa and I, after fill in the blank for you. What's it going to be? Let's make it something that fits you. So take a look at what you've done before, and maybe that will lead you to where you want to go next.
I love that. Thank you so much. And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Antarctica Did That For Me podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support our efforts, we would love it if you would tell your friends. And if you leave us a review on Spotify or Apple, it will help us find more of our fellow adventurers. We release a new episode every Tuesday, and we are a video and audio podcast, so you can watch or just listen. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and more, or find everything, including links to our social media, at our website, antarcticadidthatforme.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next week, keep thinking about what opening your own heart to adventure could do for you.